Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Lucas Oil, TireRack.com, and RockAuto.com. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Thank you, Alec Webb, and welcome everyone to MotorWeek podcast number 276. I am John Davis, and joining me today at MotorWeek World Headquarters is Brian Roberts, Jessica Ray, and Alexander Kellum. Alex.
Yep.
Yeah, Alexander. Do you use that much?
I use Alexander on all my professional stuff, but then,
but not,
just
we're not
casually.
professional enough.
Oh, well, hey, it says Alexander on the paper, so we are.
Okay, we're going to cover a number of things. We've got a lightning round. We have a YouTube question, but really the focus of this podcast is going to be the 2022 New York International Auto Show, back in its old place, opening to the media just before Easter. And while it wasn't as big as past New York auto shows have been, it was very significant. There were a lot of new vehicles shown, and we're kind of going to go through the list. And I tell you what, Jessica, why don't you start with what probably was the largest physically and maybe one of the most important intros there.
Well, we kind of knew this was coming eventually. Really, the biggest all around would have to be the reveal of the Jeep Wagoneer L and Grand Wagoneer L, which essentially is the extended wheelbase version of the full-size Wagoneer SUV. And I believe it makes it the largest in the class.
It's what, an inch longer than
the
Suburban. So it's a big box. It's a foot longer than the regular Grand Wagon.
Yeah, and even behind the third row, it is even just squeezes out a little bit more space in that rear.
Right, it's a little larger than the Suburban or the Yukon XL behind the third row.
Yeah,
that's
pretty
significant. What was your first? When you saw it roll out on stage, what did you think?
It's a behemoth. It's huge. It's huge. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's big. It's already had kind of awkward proportions, not in this long wheelbase version, and it's almost a little bit even more awkward in the rear. But it's a big truck.
But what you gotta love is the new Hurricane twin turbo i6, for sure.
Now, that engine intrigues me, and because since they announced that twin turbo inline six, there've been other rumors of other manufacturers bringing out new inline six. So, I mean, it's a perfect engine if you're going to do rear and all-wheel drive or rear and four-wheel drive. Not a good engine if you're going to do any kind of front-wheel drive longitudinal placement. I mean, I'm impressed, and it's like, hey, more power than in most V8s and in a more usable package.
Yeah.
I mean 510 horsepower, but for a size of that vehicle, you're going to need it, especially when you got a payload, you want to do any towing. Mm-hmm. So that will definitely come in handy.
Yeah, 10,000-pound towing capacity. If you buy a vehicle like that, you're going to want the power. And of course, the pro of going with the twin turbo i6, of course, also becomes efficiency, and Jeep really wants to be the most green SUV brand on the planet, and you got to start offering things that are a little bit more efficient. So they're saying about 1 to 2 miles per gallon better combined compared to the existing V8, which, if you add up all those miles, that can be a lot. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not great, but it's better.
Alex, any impression from you? You were back here writing everything up and posting it.
So specifically about the Hurricane, or just
in general, what you saw from Jeep, because Jeep not only did that, but they also did the carbide.
Yeah. So I had attended whatever that digital precursor was to the show, where they also showed off the Wagoneer and everything. And I mean, since then I've been seeing a lot of memes about it. A lot of it's like a Subway sandwich longer than what they got now and stuff. And I'm like, ooh, that's good. But yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things where I will be completely honest. When I first saw it, it felt a little gratuitous. I was like, man, they need something bigger. But then when you we're talking about like the rear leg room and all that stuff, and after being at the Range Rover event recently and sitting in like a third row vehicle and stuff and realizing the importance of rear leg room and everything, I'm like, all right, I can see the practicality in that. And then as we're talking about with the Hurricane, yeah, it makes sense why they want to switch away from V8s again. Love V8s, but yeah, being like Jessica brought up, every little bit counts, and over the long run, I mean, that's going to matter, especially in such a big vehicle.
Yeah,
I like that Wagoneer carbide trim that they showed.
Yeah.
All decked out in black. I mean, it makes luxury look a lot more aggressive. Well, that was pretty cool.
It did look very cool.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, speaking of a dark finish, I mean, it wouldn't be any manufacturer's auto show without saying something about electrified or electric vehicles. And they have already shown this concept called the Chrysler Airflow they did at the Consumer Electronics Show in January. So they brought a graphite, a dark version, to the show. So it wasn't a huge reveal, but I got to tell you, it looked pretty good.
Yeah.
It looked a lot better than the white one.
It was the alter ego version.
Yeah.
That's what they said.
Very slick.
They're still not saying that the production EV, which I think is 2025?
2025.
Is going to be like this. But it was a nice looking, kind of squared off hatchback / SUV. It reminded me a little bit of several other vehicles we've seen in the past. But it was pretty nice looking.
Yeah, I mean, when we heard originally that the Airflow, when they revealed the concept and then Chrysler kind of came out and said, well, the production one isn't going to look like this. I mean, the outrage really, it was
really
silly because it looks very good. I think the name is fantastic.
Production ready.
Yeah, it looks like a production ready vehicle and it looked upscale. I mean, it sort of was like everything that the Chrysler brand really needs.
Exactly.
In order to kind of start selling cars again.
It wasn't the only, Chrysler didn't have, or Jeep, I should say, didn't, we keep calling it Chrysler, Stellantis. They weren't the only ones that had big boxes to show. There were also mid-cycle updates on the Kia Telluride and the Hyundai Palisade, the respective brands' largest three-row SUVs, which now look kind of small next to the Grand Wagoneers. But they weren't major changes. A couple more features.
No,
anything to add?
I really like the updated face of the Telluride with the new headlights, and then it has a nice touch screen, and then a couple of different off-road packages.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah,
I'll go the other way and say I didn't care for the update on the Palisade. Now I own, here's truth in broadcasting. I own a current Palisade, and I thought the new one. They said it was going to look more like the Santa Fe. I guess it does, but the little blocky square high-intensity lighting, I don't know, I just didn't care for it as much. Otherwise, it looks a few more features. It's basically the same vehicle as before, which is a terrific vehicle. Still has the V6.
Carryover V6.
Carryover V6, which may be an endangered species in Europe. They're powering them with a turbocharged four-cylinder. Probably will get that eventually.
I mean, it's one of those things where they gave it just enough updates because they're selling so many of them.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically the Telluride, that is just you cannot find one that is not marked up a significant amount because it's just everyone wants one.
Kia actually had their best, the second best quarter last quarter in sales for that.
Yeah, and I think I can't remember what they said they were upping production capacity for the Telluride, maybe 200,000 vehicles.
I believe it.
But I mean, they just can't stop selling them. They literally can't.
They're both in high demand, but of course the Palisade still is imported, and I think that's got even more issues in production. But speaking of Kia, that wasn't by far the only thing that they had in New York.
Yeah.
Well, the redesigned Niro.
Yes.
I mean, I think that was huge. Especially,
I really like it.
Yeah, it looks really nice.
Looks great.
You got a hybrid, you got a PHEV, and you got a battery electric. So you have all the choices covered right there.
No just internal combustion engine. No, you can't get it's everything's got some electrification, just like what the Venza from.
But that seems to be like the future of where Kia is moving.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be what their lineup is probably going to look like in the near future, that all you're going to have is some either electrified version or a full electric version. And that kind of also brings us to something else that they showed, which is a very interesting concept. It's the EV9 concept.
Speaking of big SUVs.
Yes, and it is big. I mean, it's big and blocky, and I mean, it's a concept right now, but it's going to be inspired by a production vehicle in the near future.
We had seen pictures of it before, but and I guess I was expecting maybe it would be a little more refined, but it wasn't. I mean, it was a real concept. It was no interior.
Right.
It was just sitting there. I still have a question about, powering something that big for enough miles to make it viable, because that's a long distance vehicle. But, I'm a skeptic at that.
Well, yeah, we'll see that a lot too with the upcoming, Ultium, GM's Ultium platform, which will eventually be used for something like a Tahoe or a Suburban.
Nissan had a couple of updates. Who wants to mention those?
Yeah, I can talk about it. We got the new Leaf, which has got just a refresh, nothing huge, but it's got now up to a 215-mile range. It's got these really interesting wheels. Did you see the wheels?
Yes,
Joe?
I did.
They are
very aerodynamic.
Very aerodynamic. Yeah. I think probably a pain to clean.
Yeah.
But
I'm surprised Nissan didn't make more of a deal about it. It was just kind of sitting there off to the side.
They almost didn't mention it. They spent more time talking about the Pathfinder Rockcrete than they did the Leaf. And I don't know, isn't the Leaf still the best-selling electric vehicle in the world? I think it is.
I'd believe it. I mean, I think the Leaf needed a little bit more time in the spotlight. I mean, people are still buying it. It's good. Any little updates they can make, even the wheels,
it's a great value.
Yeah.
Yeah, for people who, I mean, there really aren't many options in that small, cheaper EV anymore. They're just building bigger, more luxurious ones.
And the Leaf gets a bad rap because everybody said, well, it's a car and I want an SUV, but it's a hatchback, folks. And believe me, this second-generation Leaf, when you open the back, it's got as much room as some of the so-called SUVs that we see in here. It doesn't have all-wheel drive. That's about it. Yeah. But it's still a very nice vehicle, very comfortable, great to drive. And, I'm a little sad that they didn't spend more time.
Yeah, talking about the Rock Creek edition, that was once an appearance package only, and now it's sort of a standalone trim for 23. New off-road suspension it gets, 18-inch wheels, and a 6,000-pound towing capacity. So if you want to do some off-roading, that should do it.
This is really interesting because when the new Pathfinder came out last year, we all said, well, they're getting back more to their basics, that old original Pathfinder, rough and rugged. But I think we still were left with the feeling it was more cosmetic. But this obviously isn't.
Yeah.
This looks like it's really got some chops.
It's got a little bit of a lift on it. I think it also gets a power increase as well, which a lot of times when we get a package like this, it really is more of an appearance thing for looks and rather than actual utility.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to kind of harp on that. I feel like a lot of times, especially with like the overlanding craze right now, it may seem gimmicky or a little easy for automakers to jump on that by offering what's really just a glorified appearance package. But to see them kind of go all out and say like, well, it's going to get a lift and it's going to get a little bit of extra power and stuff like that. Going back to what John was saying, where the Pathfinder going back to some of its more rugged roots, like this really shows that they are more dedicated towards that, which is nice to see. It's confidence inspiring,
Another mid-cycle refresh over at Subaru. The Outback has gotten an update. I guess we still call it a sport utility wagon or whatever.
I would say that's another one that was with the Nissan. You really didn't hear a whole lot about at the show. It wasn't on the center stage. It was kind of off.
Was there a reason for that?
Well, they had the Solara.
Yes.
Solterra.
Solterra there, which, if you don't know, was basically built in conjunction with Toyota.
But that just brings it up to date with the Impreza and the WRX styling.
I thought it looked better.
Uh-huh.
And a few more features in there. I mean, it's a hugely popular vehicle. It's made here, and there's been good supplies of them. But, I heard an interesting thing from somebody told me that they were I guess Brian Robinson, our staff, was trying to get a Subaru Forester for one of our shoots, and the dealer said they won't get one for 6 months.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Toyota GR Corolla.
Yes.
Is this overuse of the GR name?
No, that's a Civic Type R and a Golf R rival. Yes.
What impressed you about it?
300 horsepower.
It was cool looking.
I thought it looked nice. Yes. Let's get one for Summit Point, for sure.
You know, it's been a long time if they've ever done a serious performance model with a Corolla in this country. I mean, I think they have, but it's been a long, long time. I honestly can't
remember the last time, no.
Big SUV over at BMW, the X7.
Yeah, we've got the big grill. Makes its way.
You got to either love that or not, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting used to it at this point, so I don't hate it. But it's, it's definitely sleek. It's very sleek, and it definitely is inching much closer to the iX in looks wise.
Interesting. Yeah,
I like the split headlights. I thought that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Alfa Romeo Tonale? That was kind of tucked away on the side as well.
Yeah, it was
very pretty.
Very pretty, very sleek. It had a very interesting green color that they had.
It really resembles the Stelvio. So,
I mean, well, it's their second SUV, and I have to admit the way that they're not spending much time marketing Alfa Romeo, and for that matter, Fiat. You almost sort of start wondering, are they even still being offered? But they had the stand full. I didn't realize that. I don't know. I looked at the Fiats and the Alphas, and I said, I didn't realize they still imported that many models. So,
well, I do think they had some Fiats there that weren't sold here in the U.S., like European specs, and I don't know. There was one specific model I remember somebody pointing out, being like, "Not sure why this is here."
Well, I thought they stopped importing the basic 500.
Right, yeah.
And there was one there.
Right, yes, exactly, yeah. But it was there.
Yeah, they still had the SUV, but they didn't have the... so anyway, but it looked good. It was all decked out in kind of a designer trim. Of all of there were a lot of new startups, and the two, I think, stood out were VinFast, which is from Vietnam, and the Indy EV startup. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about VinFast first. They had all three of their vehicles on display: the VF7, the VF8, the VF9. You can get the idea: small, medium, and large. They've announced a new plant to be built in North Carolina, so they're all EV. This is strictly an electric vehicle manufacturer, or at least that's where they're headed. And what do you think? I mean, you can either take them individually or talk about it in general. It's the first time we've really seen them. I will say the fit and finish look pretty good, but these are auto show cars. What do you think of VinFast?
What was kind of interesting to me is, like, I thought the VF7 was bigger than the VF8. They look like to me.
I like the 7 the best.
I like the 7 the best as well, because if you look at the VF8, I wasn't a really big fan. I felt like maybe it was like a previous gen sort of EV kind of look to it. The VF9 is big.
Yeah,
I mean, that's I mean, probably just as big as the EV9 concept that we saw. I mean, it's big. It kind of looked almost like a Kia Carnival, like, on the profile, because it was so long. So it kind of had this like van-like look at it.
Anything strike you about the interiors?
Well, yeah. I mean, the interior... first, I will say I felt like build quality was pretty decent. Obviously, we didn't get to spend too much time with it, but the interior is very simple.
For startups, I think the build quality was really good compared to what we've seen before.
Especially from some of the Chinese, even some established Chinese automakers.
Well, they definitely... VinFast seems to have some proper footing behind it, more than startups.
I mean, I think one of the biggest news items of the VinFast, and obviously we're gonna talk about this in the lightning round, but it's the catch of, the prices do not include the lithium battery packs.
Yeah,
that's something I guess we can talk more about the whole subscription.
Since you brought it up, why don't you talk about it?
Well,
yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important thing. We can get to it a little bit later, but this not owning the battery not only substantially lowers the out-of-pocket costs,
but front, yes.
It's what we've been hearing from electric companies from a long time, that maybe they would get into that business of actually controlling the sources of the batteries. But the other thing that struck me was the interior had the single central screen, not only like Tesla, but you can go back to the Mini Coopers that probably started that trend and stuff in Europe way after World War II. That was pretty interesting. What do you think VinFast brings to the market?
Well, I mean, price, I think, but it is tough because if they would have come here maybe 2 years earlier, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But they're coming into a market that is full of EVs now. You know, they're not going to be the only ones doing what they're doing. So I think it's going to be difficult. I think price-wise, you know, they start just over $40,000. We don't know what destination fees is, so we can't give you an exact number quite yet. And then it just kind of goes up from there, between 40 and 50.
Before any incentives. They do offer good mileage. Well, I think the 8 is, 290 miles. That's their target.
Proper, yeah.
And a big warranty, 10 years.
Yes. And you know, when like they said, we'll talk a little bit more about batteries.
And that's what separates them is the battery subscription right now.
Yeah.
Because no one else is doing that.
In conjunction with the show, I believe they announced a partnership with Electrify America, which we're seeing a lot of, but theirs is a little different where I had to reread the press release like 3 times to make sure I got it right. You get 2 complimentary charging sessions. A lot of these partnerships, it's 2 years of complimentary charging sessions, but they're capped at a certain time limit. This one just said 2 sessions, which I thought was
like
weird.
Total or per month? Maybe?
I could be totally wrong, but I read the
that's,
release multiple times. I checked other sources just to make sure, and it said 2 sessions. Now, I wonder if this is just really a precursor to what they want to do with a partnership, which, I mean, that's fair. That's fine. Maybe it has something to do with this like flex plan and stuff with the battery. Maybe something with that, throw the wrench in the plan. I don't know.
It could be too like maybe a plug and charge, plug and go sort of situation because I guess like a Porsche has where you can just plug in the car. It recognizes the car and you just keep a thing on file and.
Well, I do know that
I think it's going to be plug and go. Yeah.
Renault and Nissan introduced a similar battery subscription in Europe a couple of years ago that failed after a few years. So hopefully they've learned a little something from it.
I wonder why.
Yeah, I'm not sure why.
Well, let's move on to the other startup that I think a lot of people were gathered around. That's Indy EV, and I knew very little about them before we got to the show.
I knew very little, but I was doing some research. The first thing that grabbed me, and this is so silly, but I went on their website and it shows a picture of people with VR headsets on in the car, and I'm like, man, you're going to go on a road trip, you're going to play VR. But that's like a big thing. I think it's called the VIC, the Vehicle something computer. I forgot the last part. It's VIC, and it's supposed to be able to. Yeah, it's the main computer, and it's able to like play games and like have all your apps and all that stuff. And it just kind of, it's like going really all in with that idea of like your car is, I don't want to say your home because that's a little dystopian, but it's like
kind of.
Yeah, but it's like your hub where you got all your entertainment, you got obviously the car, you can go places.
Well, if we ever get to the autonomous nirvana, that's exactly what it'll be.
Yeah,
it'll be basically the Jetsons like we've seen.
They started taking pre-orders the day they had their press conference on the Indy 1. So yeah, it has a 300-mile range. It's a California-based company, and the 5-passenger crossover should start, they say, in around $45,000. So
it had like the dash area was like a cluster, and then like right beside it was 2 large computer monitors because they said there was like 2 computers, like actual desktop computers within the car.
On their website, the one on the left has like Windows up, and then the next one has like all your apps and everything. And it's wild to me that that's where we're at.
Seems customizable, which might be very interesting to a lot of like very tech. Heavy
people are going to be jailbreaking their cars.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Exactly. Do whatever you want with it.
What is this automotive world coming to? The last thing from New York we're going to talk about, and I saved it for last on purpose, the return of the Volkswagen minibus, the Volkswagen ID Buzz. And yes, it has been the buzz for, 4 years now probably? But
more than that. I think since like 2017.
The production one was there. Yeah. You got closer to it than I did.
Yeah.
So What do you think? I think it's going to be a giant hit myself.
I think it'll be a hit. I mean, I've been a pretty big fan of the ID4, so if they can build, they build upon that, and this is just a bigger version. Obviously, this was the European spec, and they have yet to reveal the U.S. spec, which should have 3 rows. But I've been a very big fan of these, the electric Volkswagens, so I can't see how it's not a hit.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I agree.
Cool
I think it's going to sell out.
Yeah.
And it pulls from everything I think that people love about the nostalgia of the bus.
And it's got the powertrain from the ID4, which we already know is very, excellent.
Mm-hmm.
So when are they expecting? Is that 24?
Yeah.
The U.S.
So
spec,
in the
it
US
should be
spec.
24. Yeah, I think it's a really cool way to bring back that old T1, T2 bus. Being an air-cooled engine, and now it's going over to EV. You're just like, oh, that's just neat. It's just cool.
There's one other EV that we're going to save for later in the show to talk about, and it's only loosely related to the New York Auto Show since it wasn't shown during the press preview days, but by the time you're listening to this, you'll probably know all about it. But before we do that, we always like to have at least one vehicle that is here now, ready to rock, that we've driven. And Alex, you just came back from sampling the 2022 Range Rover. Would you like to expand the all new, for the record, all new Granddaddy Range Rover?
Yes. So
it's only, I think, like the 5th generation.
Yeah. So they've been in the business of this for 5 decades now, 5 generations.
They invented the luxury SUV.
And they certainly live up to it. So with this one, I should preface this by saying the one we spent the most time in was I believe it's the 4.4 liter V8 twin turbo. It was the first edition, which, as the name suggests, you'll only be able to get for the first year. It was in this beautiful gold color, really nice. And it's still you can get it as a 2-row, and that's a 4 or 5-seater. But now they're offering a version where it's the first one ever. It's a 3-row with 7 seats. And I alluded to this before. To get it out of the way, 6'2", sat in the back, enough legroom for like a short jaunt. And like if I had moved the seat forward more, I would have been more comfortable. But the point is, it's there and it's practical. They did mention one of the PR folks there said if any of our current orders or like kind of gauging interest, if that shows anything, the 7-row, the 3-row 7-seater is going to be very popular. But again, we spent most of our time in what I guess you could say is more traditional, the 2-row. A lot of fun to drive. We did a lot of off-roading with it, which I thought was, you take a $170,000 vehicle off-road and you're like, oh, should I really be doing this? I don't know.
But it's a Land Rover, you have to.
Yeah, exactly. You have to. And again, it lives up to that pedigree. It's got the 4-wheel steering, which made a lot of tight turns very easy. A lot of drive modes in it that, again, made like going through mud, going over rocks, very... it almost felt like you weren't doing anything special at all. They really like to talk about the luxury experience. They had a lot of like sound deadening seemed to be a thing they were really focusing on this time. They even have like headrests with like speakers built in, which someone in the event goes, it doesn't seem like kind of like a safety concern. And they were like, no, it's fine. We've tested it. It shouldn't block out anything.
Better than headphones.
Right. They basically said it more or less helps block out maybe what's going on behind you, like in the rear seats, like people with their own infotainment as opposed to, what you're doing. But very comfortable ride.
When you think about all of us here, there's a distinct difference when you get into a Range Rover versus a Land Rover. It's not just the ambiance. They are tuned very, very differently, I think. I mean, they're both incredibly capable, but for that real luxury experience, even though I personally think the Land Rover is nudging at their heels, but the Range Rover just seems to keep ratcheting up the whole experience. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a different way, though. I think because the Land Rover is more rugged, and it's meant to be that way. But the people who are buying them are expecting a certain caliber of interior, which is why it just keeps getting nicer and nicer and nicer. But when you buy a Range Rover, you are expecting luxury,
the best,
the best.
And
you're spending that much money on a car.
Another important thing to note about it is, I believe next year is when. So right now it's like a mild hybrid system, but next year we'll be getting the plug-in hybrid, and then 2024 it'll be all electric.
Yes,
that's pretty neat.
They're being very aggressive, and I was going to
Yeah.
bring that point up, so maybe you can speak to it a little bit. This is an all new chassis. And this
The
chassis
MLA
is
Flex.
designed. That's where the Flex comes in, to be both internal combustion engine and just about any kind of electric you could want. This is a major thing that is happening in the auto industry.
Yep.
We've never seen this much flexibility put into one chassis before. It's usually been either or, but this is the new wave.
Yeah.
So-
I mean, it seems that all automakers are thinking about this. Jeep same way, because they're expecting to launch all the plug-in hybrid models, and they're building their platforms to, so there's no compromise.
I mean, I
for
don't think
all
you want to
models.
alienate any consumer.
True.
That's why they're doing it.
Yeah.
Just give different varieties to different folks.
Absolutely.
Exactly right. And the head of BMW was in the U.S., and he gave a speech, and he said, do not ignore the internal combustion engine buyer. If you're heading to be all electric, you may be leaving a lot of people out of your portfolio, and they will go somewhere else. It was a very interesting speech. Which I think is one of the reasons the Europeans seem to be spending more time talking about plug-in hybrids than we do,
Yeah.
which I think still makes a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's go to our lightning round, and let's go to tackle this VinFast subscription service. VinFast officially announced the pricing for their unconventional battery subscriptions. There are two options, a flexible plan and a fixed plan. The flexible plan runs $35 a month for the VF8 and $44 a month for the VF9. This is what you're paying just for the battery, and includes 310 miles of travel a month, which doesn't sound like very much to me. Any additional travel is 11 cents per mile for the VF8 and 15 cents for the VF9. The fixed plan costs $110 a month for the VF8 and $160 for the VF9 for unlimited miles. This is on top, of course, of the original cost of the vehicles. Do you think American buyers are ready for this, and speak to the fact it may be an age thing?
No.
Oh,
Well,
boy, that was direct.
No, and not even speaking from a monetary standpoint, just very looking at it, it's a subscription service, and I think we've seen a lot of pushback on subscription services, live service updates for different mediums and stuff. When I look at this, I don't know if maybe for some people this is like a great deal, this monetarily makes sense, and that's fine. And look, I'm all open to being proven wrong, but I see it as people are going to look at it as, wow, so I'm already paying a monthly payment, and now I have to pay even more for this. They won't want to do it. I mean, didn't Toyota recently? I know it's very different, but they got in trouble in quotes with, what was it, like remote start was behind a paywall.
They were going to charge.
Oh,
they
yeah.
were gonna start
And
charging
while
people.
this does not equate to that, I think a lot of people, like mentally, you look at it and you're like, I got to pay extra for that. Like, they don't want to do it.
Well,
that's just me.
I think it's all
Maybe I'm
about
bitter.
educating the
Yes.
educating the consumer,
Mm-hmm.
because it is very, I think, confusing. When you look at all that, talking about 310 miles a month. That's
Yeah, I had
that's
trouble
3,000. That's
writing it.
3,600 miles a year. I mean,
Yeah.
the average person is 13,000 miles
Yeah.
a year.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That
it's-
seemed incredibly low.
yeah, I mean, I think if you educate them and you have a good outlet like that, people may understand it. But you're right. Any kind of subscription service for anything,
Yeah, it's just going to
my
get
Netflix
pushback.
bill goes up $2 a month. I'm concerned. I mean,
Right.
so it's always difficult to have a
I mean, one of the biggest concerns that people seem to have is how long is my battery going to last? And we do know that these batteries will degrade over time. They'll become less efficient. That's just the way that it works, and that's how they're built, and that's how every single battery and every single thing that exists works. So to me, this is the sustainable thing, because it kind of means that, all right, once you get to a certain I want to say it's under 75% usability or something within the battery, something around there, then you just get a new battery, and that's how it works. So to me, I mean, that's, instead of throwing away a car, you're just replacing the battery. But you just have to kind of get in your mind that you're just paying that cost up front. And then you also have to be like, I want to keep this car for 15 years. And will this car last for all the rest of the components last for 15 years? So it's a very, very tricky thing that I'm interested to see how, maybe five years down the line, how this kind of goes.
And I'm not convinced yet most people are going to be keeping electric vehicles that long, at least not at this generation. It'll have to be further down the line. Going to be interesting.
Absolutely.
VinFast and their subscription service. A lot of electric companies are looking at this because they think electric utilities, they think they can possibly start a new business by subsidizing the purchase of vehicles and then basically leasing the battery back to you.
That's
interesting. It's been talked a lot about.
Very interesting.
Because they're saying they want people to buy electric vehicles, obviously. So they're thinking if we can lower the price for a consumer by essentially buying the battery from them and then leasing it back or some deal like that, they might increase their own business in the same time.
So basically like solar.
Yeah.
Basically exactly like solar power.
Pretty close.
Which people love how that works.
As long as you've got sun. Okay, let's. This also has to do with the VinFast, but also others. What I noticed with the VinFast was the central screen. Okay, not a new concept. Been around probably even before the Mini Cooper. Why do you think EVs like Tesla and VinFast and other automakers in the past, why do you think they go for a single centrally located screen where you have to take your eyes off the road to do just about anything?
So you can have right-hand drive and left-hand drive vehicles for different markets?
Why? Because it
Cha-ching.
costs less.
Yes.
Money.
I wonder if there's another reason, because that's the only thing I can come.
iPads in the dash. I'm going to say aesthetic. I think a lot of things we're seeing right now with EVs is a minimalist design. Even non-EVs.
Because of Tesla.
And, it's one of those things where when it's off, it's just a black screen, and I know that doesn't really look the best, but for some people, they don't want to have all the switches and knobs. I think a lot of people can agree having switches and knobs, like physical controls, is great, but I guess one of the perks to having a big iPad is, like an actual iPad, you can update it. So if the automakers in 3 years are like, remember that design? That was kind of whack. I don't know why we did that. They can update it, and then they can change it. Or they can say, our user feedback is saying, the HVAC control, it's a little tricky here. Why don't we put it here instead? They could change those things somehow, and I don't know. Maybe.
But you can do that with any touch screen. I mean, all these new cars are coming.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Probably upgradable. Yeah. I mean, I just find, like, when you're in a Tesla, I find it very. We don't like vehicles that you have to look away from the road a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at the same time have to do 5 pushes of a tactile switch in order to get it to do something that you used to turn a knob for.
Right.
So I think the drawbacks for the consumer are huge, but I have to say, I don't think people care. I mean, nobody really cares that Tesla did it.
I don't think they start to care until they buy it and then they experience it, and then
they live with it.
They're trying to find where they can turn on their heated seat, and they have to go through 3 menu options just to turn on a heated seat.
And we had that WRX in recently that had the big screen in it.
Yeah,
and one thing I noticed, the thing that I didn't like the most about it was the smartphone integration, and I use Android Auto, so I don't know if it's different with Apple CarPlay, but when you plug it in, it's like you got this whole giant rectangle, and then your Android Auto just takes up one little part.
Oh, really?
So then, and I understand that it's because they can't, really that's optimization, I think, more on Google's part or Apple's part than it is Subaru. But for me, it was still very usable. It was about the size as it is in my Mustang, so I didn't feel bad.
That's funny you say that, because, that's got the same size screen, I think, as the Outback.
It does. Yeah.
And I love the integration of
Really?
Apple CarPlay in the Outback. Because we have the long-term Prius, which has that sort of same long screen, and I drove the Prius down to Roebling, And I just remember like the navigation was teeny tiny. Like I just disliked it. And my grandma has a 21 Outback, so I drove one. I drove it around town when I went to go visit her for the holidays. And you plug that thing in, and it took up a decent chunk of the screen. So maybe that was a
setting.
It could be an Android thing also.
Yeah,
not using an Apple, so it could be that.
Yeah, because I had the iPhone.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was still very usable, and I enjoyed it. It was fine, but
One screen in the middle, somewhat controversy. Now we've saved a vehicle that we teased at the beginning that didn't come out exactly when the Auto Show Media Days were up, and we still don't know a lot about it, but this will never be accused of having only one screen, and this is the Mercedes EQS SUV, basically their equivalent of the GLS. It's their S-Class SUV, all electric. What do we know so far?
Well, it's
Huge.
It's huge. It's built on the same EQ platform as the rest of
sedan.
the lineup.
Yeah.
Or the larger, I should say, the larger
Right.
sedan. So the EQS, the EQE, and now the EQS SUV, and also the future EQE SUV. So
Got that, folks?
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll take a test later.
But pretty much what we know, and it does not surprise me in the least, is that it's going to be very much similar to the EQS, the normal EQS sedan on the inside. It's got that huge hyper screen, which is like 54 inches or something.
Literally goes across the entire cabin, except for just a little space.
It does. So it should be pretty plush. And that platform, the EV platform, does really well. If it has the same sort of powertrain setup as the EQS, you should be seeing like over 300 miles of range, and also a lot of power as well.
I can't get over how many EQSs we've seen locally in the Baltimore, Washington area already.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it is the ultimate status symbol. It's going to replace, it's already replaced, I think, the Tesla as a status symbol. It's quite a...
Well, that interior, I mean, say what you want about the exterior.
Yeah, I'm not a fan
that
of the exterior. It looks like
is
a melted gumdrop to me. So.
It's aerodynamic, John.
Yeah, I know. But it's impressive, especially as it leaves you in the dust at a stoplight.
Yep. Yeah.
Let's wrap up with rant and raves. Anybody got anything that's bothering them this week? Or looking around the table? Brian Roberts is shaking his head.
I'm good.
Well, I'm going to give a rave.
Okay.
And this is a rave to one of our own. Our audio engineer and manager of the audio department here, Jim Bigwood, has announced his retirement. Jim has been the podcast engineer for us and engineer on just about every other thing I've done at Maryland Public Television, where we're based in the last 3 or 4 decades. Jim is going on to just going to have a lot of fun, I think, and he certainly has well earned his retirement. I don't know, Jim, if you can actually speak, that we can hear you during the podcast. He's probably just, I know he's back there with a giant smile on his face. He did the first podcast we ever did, and he's done over the years all but maybe a handful, whether he was on some other assignment or away on vacation or something. Jim, the reason our podcasts have done so well is because you make us sound so much better than we have any right to sound. And everybody on MotorWeek wishes you Godspeed, have a great retirement, and stay in touch and come back for all of the alumni days and tell us about all the great things you're doing. So
thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
There he goes. And that's our
right.
We're choking
Thanks.
up here.
Thanks, Jim.
As our
Thank
let's
you,
give
Jim.
Jim a round of applause. And that just peaked his meter back there.
Yeah.
I also want to thank our podcast producer, Jessica Ray, Bob Mixter, the podcast's creator. And with us today has been senior executive producer Brian Roberts. Of course, Jessica Ray, our digital producer, and assistant writer Alexander.
You got it.
Alex. Thanks, everybody out there. If you want to know more about MotorWeek, please hop over to our website, motorweek.org. On the upper right-hand, pull down about the show. You can put in your zip code and find the local PBS station and the times and dates in your area that broadcast us each and every week. If you're a cable fan, hop on over to MAV TV. It's mavtv.com. If you're looking for the schedule, they air us multiple times during the week. You can see us on PBS Living. You can go to pbs.org/MotorWeek and stream the show free. Basically, out there, if you have a screen, you can watch MotorWeek. In the meantime, thanks for listening to our podcast, and thanks for being a part of MotorWeek.
You've been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Lucas Oil, TireRack.com, and RockAuto.com. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at MotorWeek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series each week on your local PBS station.